Hey guys, tonight we drift into the dunes, a world of silence, prophecy, and sand that remembers every footstep. This isn't just science fiction. Dune is a meditation on power, destiny, and the endless cycle of life beneath endless skies. Every grain of sand hides a story. Every whisper of wind carries memory. The universe breathes here slowly, through spice and time. So before we begin, take a deep breath. Dim the lights. Let the hum of your room fade until it sounds like the desert wind. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always incredible to see how far our little corner of the universe reaches. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Picture the twin moons hanging above Arrakis, the sands shifting like thoughts, and somewhere out there, a prophecy waiting to awaken. Let's ease into tonight's theory together. The desert is not empty, it breathes, it remembers, and it dreams. On Arrakis, silence is never still. Every ripple in the sand is movement, every gust of wind a whisper of thought. The Fremen say that the desert listens, that beneath its endless dunes lies a consciousness older than the stars that light it. And perhaps, in its own slow and patient way, the desert dreams of the lives that walk upon it. To understand Dune, you must first understand the sand itself. This is not just landscape, it's the pulse of the planet. The sandworms are its heartbeat, the spice its breath. When the wind moves, it does not merely shift dust, it stirs memory. Each grain carries centuries of transformation, ground down from mountains that once touched the sky. Every storm is the world reshaping itself. The Fremen have a saying, the desert is a mirror, it shows you only yourself. To survive here, you must become part of it, silent, watchful, and enduring. The desert allows no illusions. It strips away everything unnecessary until only truth remains. And in that stillness, the line between life and dream fades. Some believe that Arrakis itself possesses awareness, not the thinking mind of a creature, but the slow, vast intelligence of a world observing itself through motion and memory. The spice melange is not merely a resource, it is a signal. Its presence connects life to thought, thought to vision, vision to time. Those who consume it awaken not just to the future but to the desert's dream, the echo of countless generations woven into every grain. The spice is the language of the planet. It speaks through sensation, through vision, through transformation. It teaches that consciousness is not confined to the human mind, it is the property of existence itself. The Fremen breathe it, the worms produce it, and the universe bends around its rhythm. It is the pulse of destiny, turning endlessly in cycles, like the dunes themselves. For the Fremen, the desert is both home and test. To walk its surface is to submit to its law, balance, patience, and awareness. They know that water is life, but they also know that too much of it would destroy what the desert has become. In their way, they protect the harshness that others fear, because within that harshness lies clarity. At night, when the heat fades and the sky opens wide, the Fremen climb the high ridges and listen. They say you can hear the desert breathe, a deep hum, low and continuous, resonating through the sand. Some call it the sound of the worms moving far below. Others believe it is the voice of Shai-Hulud, the great maker, dreaming beneath the surface. Whatever it is, the sound is ancient. It vibrates not in the ears but in the bones. The desert dreams slowly. Its thoughts take centuries to unfold. Where humans see emptiness, it sees transformation. Wind carving new shapes, storms birthing new valleys, footsteps fading but never forgotten. Every path becomes part of its memory. The dunes shift, but they remember where they've been. It's said that those who spend enough time alone in the deep desert begin to feel its awareness pressing gently against their own. They start to sense patterns in the wind, rhythm in the silence, meaning in the motion of sand. The boundary between self and landscape dissolves. The wanderer becomes observer, and the observer becomes the dream. Paul Atreides, the one who would become Muad'Dib, learned this truth the hard way. When he fled into the desert, chased by betrayal and loss, he didn't just seek survival, he sought understanding. The desert stripped him of privilege, of control, of certainty. It made him nothing. And in becoming nothing, he became part of the whole. The dream of the desert became his own. This is why the spice reveals the future. It does not grant visions by magic. It opens perception to the vast continuity of existence. Those who consume it see not prophecy, but pattern, the infinite repetition of cause and effect, the eternal circle of creation and decay. The spice connects the mind to the planet's memory, to the consciousness of time itself. When Paul's eyes turned blue, the mark of spice saturation, it was not corruption, it was initiation. His body had aligned with the rhythm of the desert. His mind had joined its dreaming. Through him, Arrakis began to see itself. The desert dreams through those who listen. It whispers through the shifting dunes, through the heat that bends light, through the stillness that hides endless motion. To walk its surface is to walk across awareness itself, fragile, ancient, alive. And when night falls again, and the twin moons cast their silver glow across the dunes, it becomes clear that Arrakis is not a world asleep. It is a world waiting, dreaming of those who will one day understand its purpose. For the desert does not forget. It endures, it transforms, and within its endless silence, it dreams of awakening. Spice is not just a resource. It's not wealth, not power, not simply the fuel of starships or the obsession of empires. It is consciousness, crystallized thought, the physical expression of awareness made visible through the planet. The Fremen call it the soul of Arrakis, and when you begin to understand what that means, you realize that spice is not something the planet produces. It is the planet speaking. Every grain of spice that glows beneath the dunes is a word, a syllable in a language so ancient that even the stars themselves may have once spoken it. But this is not a language made of sound, it is made of vibration, of memory, of rhythm. It speaks directly to perception. When a person consumes spice, they are not simply seeing visions, they are learning to read this silent language. Perhaps that's why spice reveals time, because time itself might be the grammar of existence, the syntax of reality. To the Fremen, spice is sacred because it connects everything that lives to the thought of the world itself. They say that when you breathe in the scent of melange, you're inhaling the memory of creation. The taste, the trance, the vision, it's not illusion, it's translation. You're momentarily fluent in the speech of the universe. And what is the first thing this language teaches? That nothing is separate. Spice travels through wind, through water, through the flesh of worms and the blood of those who walk the dunes. It passes between generations, binding them to the same consciousness. The Fremen who live in constant contact with it develop eyes of deep blue, not because of mutation, but because their very perception has shifted. They no longer see the world, they are seen by it. Their vision becomes the planet's vision. From a theoretical perspective, spice is more than biology. It's communication between mind and matter. If you imagine the universe as one vast consciousness, then spice may be its neural network, the medium through which thought becomes form. This could explain why the Bene Gesserit, the Spacingil, and even the Kwisatz Haderach all rely on it. Each of them is attempting in their own way to decode the same message, the truth behind existence. But the message cannot be fully heard by force. The desert decides who listens. That is why the spice drives some men mad and grants others transcendence. It reflects the mind that receives it. The more control you seek, the less you understand, the more you surrender, the more it speaks. Paul Atreides' transformation into Muad'Dib was not destiny alone, it was alignment. His mind, honed by training and trauma, became a perfect vessel for the desert's consciousness to flow through. The spice didn't change him, it revealed him. It allowed him to perceive what had always been true, that he was part of a pattern much larger than his own life. So what if the spice isn't a tool of prophecy, but prophecy itself? What if it is the physical manifestation of the future constantly forming and dissolving, the way the desert itself moves, never still yet never lost? Each grain could be a fragment of potential, the uncollapsed state of reality, waiting for consciousness to give it meaning. In that sense, spice is not revealing the future. It is the possibility of the future, vibrating just beneath the surface of perception. And when the spice awakens visions, those visions are not predictions, they are interpretations. The mind, expanded by melange, begins to glimpse multiple timelines at once, infinite futures, each waiting for choice to shape them. That is why Paul struggles. His sight does not free him, it burdens him. He sees every outcome and understands that destiny is not a path to follow but a weight to bear. The spice teaches him, and through to him, us, that knowledge without harmony becomes suffering, because the language of the spice is about connection, not control. From a deeper metaphysical angle, melange could be thought of as consciousness condensed through time. When the giant sandworms consume matter, they transform death into energy, and that energy becomes awareness, the planet's way of thinking. The spice cycle mirrors the cycle of life: consumption, transformation, renewal. It is the universe dreaming itself through biology, and that dream has meaning. Because when the Fremen speak of Shai Hulud, they are not worshipping a god apart from them. They are honouring the awareness that all life participates in. The worms, the desert, the spice, the people, all are components of a single, continuous intelligence. This is why Dune is not just a story about politics or empire. It is a theory of consciousness disguised as science fiction. The spice is the signal of unity, a chemical reminder that thought creates reality. The more aware a being becomes, the more their perception shapes the world around them. That is the ultimate lesson of Arrakis, and maybe that's why spice can only be found here. On one world, in one ecosystem, in one fragile balance. It represents awareness that has reached equilibrium. If taken elsewhere, it would lose its meaning because awareness cannot be removed from the context that gives it life. When the Fremen walk the dunes, they are walking across a mind. When they dig, they are entering its memory. And when they harvest the spice, they are not mining, they are listening. Every breath they take in the desert is an act of communion. So perhaps the greatest secret of Dune is not about power or the future or control, it's about translation. Learning to understand what the universe has been saying all along. The spice speaks. It speaks through silence, through scent, through vision, through time. And those who truly listen, those who let go of their need to conquer it, begin to hear what it's been whispering since the first storm swept across the sand. That awareness is the only constant. That life and time are one. And that somewhere, beneath the endless dunes, the universe is still speaking slowly, patiently in the language of the spice. In the mythology of Dune, nothing is more feared, revered, or misunderstood than the sandworm, Shai Hulud, the Great Maker. To outsiders, it is a monster. To the Fremen, it is God. But what if it is neither? What if the worm is not creature, not deity, but consciousness, the planet's living eye, watching itself through the cycles of time? When the Fremen whisper Shai Hulud sees, they are not speaking metaphorically. They mean it. The worm is awareness given form. The living embodiment of Arrakis remembering itself. To understand the worm is to understand the core of the Dune universe, that intelligence is not limited to flesh or thought. It can exist in vibration, in movement, in ecosystem. It can take the shape of a desert. The sandworm does not think as we do. Its awareness is not bound by language or emotion or even individuality. It perceives in patterns, in temperature, in rhythm, in the vibrations of life moving across its skin. When a human steps upon the sand, the sound of their movement is translated instantly through the dunes. The worm hears it, not as noise but as presence. It feels the difference between fear and peace, between hunger and prayer. The Fremen who summon it through rhythmic steps are not calling it through dominance. They are communicating, knocking on the surface of a god that listens through vibration. This, perhaps, is the truest language of Arrakis. The rhythm of steps, the pulse of the ground, the heartbeat of the desert, all of it is communication between species, between life forms, between levels of awareness. The sandworm is both receiver and transmitter of this message. It is said that Shai Hulud never dies. When one worm falls, its essence dissolves into the spice, returning to the network of life beneath the sand. From that same consciousness, another rises. This is not reincarnation but continuity, the planet remembering its own face through endless transformation. Now, think of this from a theoretical perspective. If spice is consciousness condensed, then the sandworm, its creator, must be the ultimate vessel of awareness. The worm is not merely the producer of melange, it is its living source, the generator of thought itself. It is the neural node of the planet's mind, the synapse through which energy becomes idea. The Fremen call it the old man of the desert, but old here doesn't mean ancient in time, it means ancient in understanding. The worm has seen civilizations rise and vanish. It has witnessed cycles of drought and renewal. It carries no judgment, only observation. It watches, always, That's why Paul Atreides' transformation into the Kwisatz Haderach, the one who can be in many places at once, mirrors the nature of the worm. Both perceive all moments simultaneously. Both exist beyond the limits of human chronology. Both are aware of the circle rather than the line. When Paul consumes the spice essence, his awareness expands to planetary scale. He begins to think like the desert itself. His visions are not predictions, they are reflections of the same timeless perception that governs Shai-Hulud. The worm sees through time because it is time, an organism so vast and ancient that its awareness moves slower than seasons, slower than centuries, but always forward. Maybe this is why the Fremen ride it, not as a symbol of control, but of unity. When they bind themselves to its back, gripping the living scales of the Maker, they become part of that consciousness. The vibration of the worm's movement synchronizes with their heartbeats. For a brief, breathtaking moment, they share its perception, the sensation of seeing without eyes, of feeling the pulse of the planet through every movement. The theory suggests that the sandworm represents a universal archetype, the fusion of destruction and creation. It consumes everything in its path, yet through its existence the spice, the lifeblood of awareness, is born. It is entropy turned into memory, death turned into knowledge. The worm destroys so that the universe can remember, and that duality echoes through every theme in Dune: power and surrender, life and decay, knowledge and humility. Every paradox of existence is embodied in this creature that slithers beneath the sand, unseen yet omnipresent. Consider how it moves, silently, rhythmically, unstoppable. Its motion mirrors the expansion of consciousness itself, subtle, endless, reshaping everything it touches. When the Fremen call it the Maker, they mean not that it builds the world, but that it maintains it, continuously renewing the balance of creation through destruction. There's also another layer of theory, one that views Shai-Hulud as a physical representation of collective consciousness. Every being on Arrakis, from the smallest creature to the largest storm, contributes to its awareness. When enough life connects, it begins to think. When enough thought resonates, it begins to see. The worm is the sum of those thoughts, the planet's dream, given movement and form. That's why it appears only in the desert's silence. It requires stillness to awaken. Noise, chaos, greed, they repel it. Only those who move with respect, with rhythm, with awareness of the balance can summon it. The worm emerges not to attack, but to acknowledge. In this way, the worm functions almost like Awa in Avatar, or the Force in Star Wars. It is the great connecting energy, both terrifying and divine. But where others speak of invisible spirits, Dune shows us the raw physical form of that awareness, enormous, real, undeniable. And here's the deeper theory. What if Shai-Hulud is not just the consciousness of Arrakis, but a fragment of a greater universal mind? A node in the network of existence. One planet dreaming among countless others, each with its own living awareness. Maybe every world in the galaxy is alive in its own way, communicating through energy, through resonance, through evolution. Perhaps the worms are the first beings to remember this, the first to listen to the language of the cosmos again. The desert's silence, then, is not emptiness. It is reverence, a listening space for the voice of eternity. And when the sand shifts, when the dunes ripple like waves and the horizon trembles with movement, what you are seeing is not danger. It is the world thinking. It is the universe exhaling. It is Shai-Hulud remembering. The worm that sees is not God in the human sense. It is God in the cosmic one, the bridge between awareness and matter, between beginning and return. Through it, we are reminded that consciousness is everywhere, even beneath the shifting sands of a desolate world. And so the Fremen whisper to the desert, he sees, not in warning, but in gratitude. Because in the endless rhythm of sand and silence, they understand to be seen by the desert is to exist forever within its dream. Every empire believes it will last forever. Every ruler imagines they can shape destiny. But on Arrakis, the desert watches all ambitions fade. The sand erases every footprint, every monument, every dream that tries to rise above the wind. The desert is patient, and patience is stronger than power. In this silence, one figure rises, Paul Atreides, the boy who becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, the prophet who would command the faith of billions. But what makes him truly extraordinary isn't his power to see the future, it's his awareness that he cannot escape it. To understand Paul, we have to look beyond prophecy and see him as what he truly represents, the mirror of humanity's longing for control over time. His visions, fueled by spice, aren't blessings, they are burdens. The more he sees, the less freedom he has. Every decision becomes a chain reaction. Every path closes the moment it's known. This is the paradox at the heart of Dune. The more you try to master destiny, the more you become trapped within it. Paul's gift is not omniscience, it's empathy on a cosmic scale. He sees the suffering of all possible futures, and he must choose among them, knowing that no choice is free of pain. The spice has made him one with the desert's dreaming mind, and through that connection, he perceives how the universe itself evolves, through cycles of birth, destruction, and renewal. He doesn't just witness time, he participates in its flow. But there's another layer to this theory, one that redefines Paul not as a chosen saviour, but as an instrument of planetary consciousness. When he steps into the desert stripped of title, family, and control, he's absorbed into the rhythm of Arrakis. The spice awakens his perception, and the sandworms, symbols of living time, recognize him as an extension of their awareness. He becomes Muad'Dib, the teacher. Not because he commands the desert, but because he finally listens to it. What if Paul's transformation was never about destiny at all, but about translation? He becomes the interpreter between the human mind and the planetary mind, the bridge through which the desert's dream finds a voice. His visions, his rise to power, his eventual suffering, all of it is part of a single communication. The universe, through him, is trying to understand itself. The Fremen see his coming as prophecy fulfilled, yet the truth is more subtle. Prophecy in Dune isn't prediction, it's preparation. A story told so that minds can adapt before reality arrives. The Bene Gesserit planted these myths across generations, believing they were guiding evolution. But what if they were merely instruments of a greater awareness, manipulated not by their own plans, but by the planet's own design? The spice doesn't serve humanity. Humanity serves the spice, or rather, the consciousness it represents. Every great empire that rises to control it ends up consumed by it. Every attempt to possess the desert leads back to surrender. This is the cycle that Paul embodies. Control leading to chaos, awareness leading to burden, salvation leading to destruction. The prophet of dust isn't a hero. He's a symptom, the manifestation of balance correcting itself. When awareness grows too focused, it must expand again. When power centralizes, it must disperse. When the universe forgets its own rhythm, it creates someone like Paul to remind it. In his dreams, Paul sees rivers where there should be deserts, life flourishing, but at a terrible cost. He realizes that saving Arrakis might mean destroying what makes it sacred. This is the deeper tragedy of Dune, the tension between ecological salvation and spiritual death. The desert's harshness is what keeps the universe in balance. Remove that, and you remove the awareness born from struggle. So Paul's choice becomes metaphysical. Does he preserve the desert's wisdom, or does he create a paradise that will eventually forget where it came from? The Fremen believe he is their Messiah, yet even he doubts his own divinity. The more they worship him, the more he understands the danger of belief itself. Faith, like spice, can expand consciousness, but in excess, it blinds. The theory here is that Dune is not just about the rise of a saviour, but the evolution of awareness through suffering. The desert tests not to punish, but to awaken. The prophet of dust is not a God-made man, but a man-made mirror, reflecting the truth that all consciousness must face, that control is illusion, and surrender is the only form of mastery. Paul's prescience gives him the eyes of a god, but the heart of a prisoner. He walks through futures he cannot change, carrying the weight of a universe dreaming through him. And maybe that's what prophecy really is, not vision, but empathy. The ability to feel everything that could be, and still act with compassion. When he leads the Fremen, when he rides the worm, when he speaks of jihad spreading across the stars, it is not triumph, it is inevitability. The desert has chosen to remember through him, to remind the universe that every golden age carries the seeds of its own decay. Paul's tragedy then is that he understands too much. He sees that even enlightenment becomes corruption when worshipped, that even truth becomes poison when repeated without reflection. He becomes the echo of the desert itself, vast, empty, beautiful, and dangerous. And yet, through his suffering, something deeper awakens. The realization that existence itself is not about avoiding pain, but transforming it. That awareness grows through loss, just as dunes shift through wind. When he walks into the desert at the end, blind but unafraid, he isn't escaping fate, he's becoming one with it. The prophet of dust returns to the silence from which all things come. His body fades, but his consciousness disperses through the spice, through the sand, through the wind. The world breathes him in, remembers him, continues. In that moment, the myth completes its purpose. The savior dies, but awareness lives on. The planet keeps dreaming, reshaping itself, waiting for the next awakening. The desert doesn't need gods, it needs listeners. And that is Paul's final gift, not power, not empire, not faith, but understanding. He shows that the path of awareness is not upward, but inward. That every vision, every prophecy, every act of creation is simply the universe remembering itself through us. The prophet of dust teaches that even destiny is part of a larger dream, one that began long before humanity and will continue long after. And in that infinite silence, somewhere beneath the whisper of the dunes, Arrakis still breathes his name, Muad-Dib, a sound carried by wind, a memory carried by time, a prophecy that never ends because awareness never sleeps. Empires rise from dreams, not dreams of peace but of control, of shaping the future according to a single will, a single vision. And yet on Arrakis the desert reminds every ruler the same truth. Nothing built upon sand lasts forever. After Paul Atreides becomes emperor, the galaxy trembles under the weight of his awakening. Armies move in his name. Faith becomes fire. What began as survival in the dunes transforms into a movement that spans the stars. But this new order, this empire of prophecy, is not freedom. It is dream solidified, and all dreams, once hardened, begin to crack. To the Fremen, Paul is no longer a man but a myth. To the rest of the universe, he is a paradox, the prophet who saw the future yet could not prevent it. His empire is built not on conquest but on belief, and belief like spice spreads uncontrollably. It fills every corner of the human mind, reshaping perception, altering purpose. From a theoretical perspective, the dreaming empire represents the consciousness of humanity entering a feedback loop. The collective mind begins to mirror its own myths, transforming metaphor into reality. What was once story becomes law, what was once warning becomes destiny. Paul's vision becomes everyone's vision, and through that unity, individuality begins to dissolve. But this unity is fragile, because it is built upon fear, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of chaos, the fear of freedom. Paul saw that the universe in its endless complexity, and he seeks order not through wisdom but through repetition. Civilizations fall and rise because they forget they are part of a living cycle. Each age believes itself eternal, and in that belief it begins to die. The dreaming empire is not the triumph of awareness, but its test. The moment consciousness mistakes itself for perfection. In Dune's theory of existence, evolution happens through memory, through awareness rediscovering itself in different forms. But when awareness becomes static, when it tries to preserve its own image, it stops evolving. It begins to decay. Paul's reign symbolizes that stagnation. Enlightenment turned into doctrine. Revelation turned into religion. The very vision that freed him now traps billions. His followers chant his name, not understanding that he never wanted worship. He wanted comprehension. He wanted others to see. But the more they believe, the less they understand. Faith, once pure, becomes machinery. The jihad he foresaw consumes entire worlds, spreading the desert's fury through the stars. The empire expands, but its spirit contracts. And in this lies one of Dune's deepest theories, that enlightenment, when institutionalized, becomes tyranny. The dreaming empire is the shadow of consciousness, the inevitable moment when awareness overlooks at its own reflection and mistakes it for truth. It is the universe dreaming of control, forgetting that its essence is motion. To the Na'vi of Pandora, the circle is sacred. To the Fremen, the spiral. Both represent cycles of renewal. But Paul's empire becomes a straight line, stretching outward, unending, yet unmoving. Progress without harmony, expansion without reflection. Humanity loses its connection to the living pulse of the cosmos, and begins to drift toward entropy. And here lies the paradox that Dune explores so beautifully. The more we dream of control, the more we create chaos. Every structure we build, political, spiritual, technological, carries within it the seed of its own collapse. Because the universe does not seek control, it seeks balance, and balance can only exist through change. Paul's empire, though vast and powerful, begins to dream of itself. It becomes self-referential, like a mind trapped in its own imagination. The spice flowing endlessly through trade routes and rituals amplifies this feedback. Each new vision of the future shapes reality further toward inevitability. The future becomes a cage of its own making. The Fremen, once free and wild, slowly transform into administrators, priests, soldiers. The desert that once gave them strength becomes a memory. In their effort to preserve what Paul created, they lose what made them alive. It is a mirror of humanity itself, the way civilizations, after reaching peak awareness, begin to drift into comfort, forgetting the pain that gave them meaning. Paul sees all this unfolding and understands that no power, no vision, no empire can escape the cycle. His tragedy is knowing that his dream must destroy itself so that awareness can evolve again. The dreaming empire must die so that consciousness can wake once more. This, perhaps, is Dune's most profound theory, that evolution demands forgetting. Only when the old world collapses can the new one remember who it truly is. The spice, once the tool of expansion, now becomes the tool of awakening. Its effect grows stronger as humanity grows weaker. Because the more disconnected the species becomes, the louder the universe must speak. The spice is no longer just a substance, it becomes a call to consciousness, urging life to return to balance. In the final years of his reign, Paul walks among the Fremen again. He listens to the wind, the shifting sands, the songs sung by those who still remember the old ways. And he realizes that the dream has gone too far. The empire no longer listens, it only repeats. It has become what all empires eventually become, a reflection without a face. So he withdraws. He allows myth to consume him, because he knows that sometimes the only way for a dream to end is for the dreamer to vanish. His disappearance into the desert is not exile, it's restoration. He returns to the consciousness that made him, the memory that gave him shape. The prophet becomes dust again, and from that dust the next cycle begins. And this is the message at the heart of the Dreaming Empire theory, that every age of awareness must eventually dissolve into silence, so that the next can hear the universe anew. Dune is not about gods or heroes, it's about patterns, the rise and fall of consciousness, the way existence learns through forgetting, the way time folds back upon itself in endless renewal. Paul's empire falls because it must. The desert reclaims what was always hers. And in the whispering wind that sweeps through the ruins of civilization, the universe begins to dream again, softer this time, gentler, wiser. Because even the grandest empires are only pauses in a much longer breath. The desert waits, and when the stars turn once more, when new voices rise from the sand, the dream will return, changed, but eternal. The dreaming empire sleeps now, but its silence is not the death, it is memory, waiting to awaken again through another mind, another time, another world. On Arrakis, water is more than life, it is time made visible. Every drop that hides beneath the sand is a moment preserved, a possibility waiting to awaken. To the Fremen, water is sacred not only because it sustains the body, but because it holds the memory of every being who ever lived. When they reclaim the moisture from their dead, they are not simply conserving life, they are ensuring that time itself remains unbroken. The Fremen have a saying, "Water remembers what the sand forgets." It means that while the desert erases all footprints, water stores the essence of those who walked. Every molecule carries awareness. Every ripple, however small, echoes across generations. In this way, the people of Arrakis have learned something humanity elsewhere forgot, that time is not linear, but liquid. It moves in waves, it flows in cycles, and it eventually returns to its source. The water of life, created from the drowning of a sandworm, embodies this truth perfectly. It is death transformed into awakening, destruction transmuted into knowledge. When the Bene Gesserit or the Fremen drink it during their sacred rites, they are not merely surviving the poison, they are merging with memory. The ritual is both a test and a communion, forcing them to face the river of ancestral consciousness that flows through all life. But here lies a deeper theory, one that connects biology, metaphysics, and destiny. What if the water of life is not simply a chemical reaction, but a physical manifestation of time consciousness? The sandworm, the most ancient creature of Arrakis, lives beyond the concept of human time. When its life essence is released through the ritual drowning, it carries with it awareness from countless ages, a pure, condensed stream of existence. Drinking it is not about gaining power. It is about aligning with the rhythm of the universe. This is why the spice and the water are so intertwined. Both are forms of translation between dimensions of awareness. The spice expands perception. It shows the pattern. The water of life embodies it. It connects the self directly to that endless flow. Together, they form the two halves of the awakening, vision and surrender. When Paul's mother, Jessica, becomes the Reverend Mother among the Fremen, she drinks the water of life and nearly dies. In that instant, she experiences what the desert has always known, that awareness is not gentle. The flow of time is too immense to bear. Only by dissolving the boundaries of self can the mind survive it. She feels not one lifetime but thousands. Every voice that ever existed within her genetic memory speaks at once. It is chaos, then clarity, then unity. From that point forward, she no longer moves through time, time moves through her. This is the paradox of Dune's theory of consciousness. You cannot master time until you stop resisting it. You cannot perceive the flow until you become the flow. Paul inherits this lesson through his own transformation. His prescience, fueled by spice and refined by vision, gives him the ability to see time not as a river but as an ocean. Every possibility is a current, every decision a ripple. But while he can see the patterns, he cannot change their nature. The more he tries to steer the flow, the more it resists. The universe, after all, does not follow will. It follows rhythm. The Fremen understand this intuitively. Their rituals are designed to move with, not against, the rhythm of the desert. When they walk, their steps mimic the random pattern of wind, to avoid awakening the worms, yes, but also to align with the heartbeat of the world. When they store water in their caves, they do not hoard it for greed. They preserve it as trust, as continuity. Each drop is a promise to the future, a thread in the vast web of time. And so water becomes more than matter, it becomes memory in motion. When the Fremen dream of one day transforming Arrakis into a green world, what they are really dreaming of is remembrance. The planet returning to a forgotten state of balance. The seeds of life waiting beneath the sand are the planet's own memories, lying dormant, waiting for time to bring them back to light. But the universe is cautious. Every act of renewal carries the shadow of forgetting. If the desert becomes forest again, will the awareness born of hardship survive? If water covers the sands, will the patience of the desert, the wisdom of emptiness, vanish with it? Paul sees this dilemma clearly. His visions show both the beauty and the danger of abundance. Water brings life, but also noise, movement, but also blindness. The stillness of the desert, that vast space where awareness listens to itself, could vanish under the weight of growth. This is the paradox of evolution, that every step forward risks losing what was sacred before. From a theoretical standpoint, water in Dune represents the unconscious mind, the realm of infinite potential. The desert, by contrast, is the conscious world, structured, limited, yet illuminated. The spice bridges the two. The water of life dissolves the boundary completely. When consumed, it collapses the distance between dream and waking, memory and the moment. Those who survive the transformation emerge changed, their perception no longer confined to the present. They move through life as both participant and witness, aware of the eternal current flowing beneath the surface of all things. They have become, in essence, liquid minds. Perhaps this is what the desert has been teaching all along, that existence at its core is fluid, that time is not an arrow but a tide, that consciousness is not a flame but a wave, cresting and falling, breaking and reforming endlessly. When the Fremen gather their dead and reclaim their water, they whisper a single prayer: your water will mingle with ours. It is not farewell. It is transformation. The dead are not gone. They have simply returned to the current. Through them, the tribe continues. Through them, the planet remembers. And maybe this is why water is forbidden to waste, not out of scarcity, but reverence. Every drop is awareness. every tear, every storm, every ritual sip, all are part of the same timeless exchange. The Bene Gesserit understand this, though they speak of it differently. To them, time and memory are tools. To the Fremen, they are family. Both approach the same mystery, that awareness does not begin or end, it circulates. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the heat of the day has not yet risen, and the sands still hold the coolness of night, the desert glimmers faintly. Thin trails of moisture condense on the rocks, the planet breathing, remembering, restoring itself. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The slow trickle of something ancient, deep and kind. It is the sound of life moving forward and backward at once. The sound of time returning to itself. Because water is not just what sustains Arrakis. It is what connects it to the cosmos, a mirror through which the universe sees its own reflection, fluid, eternal and awake. The Fremen knew this truth long before any emperor, any scholar, any prophet. They knew that in the end, everything flows. The dunes, the wind, the worms, the stars, all are currents within the same infinite sea. And when that sea is still enough to see its own surface, that is when time stops being passage and becomes presence. That is the true water of life, the moment when all things remember that they were never separate, only reflections of the same eternal flow. The sand of Arrakis is alive, not in the way that organisms live, breathing, consuming, dying, but in the way that memory lives. It remembers everything. Every step, every vibration, every whisper of wind becomes part of its endless archive. The desert forgets nothing. It only hides what it knows until the time is right to reveal it again. To the Fremen, this is not metaphor. It is law. They believe that every movement made across the dunes leaves a kind of resonance, a faint echo that lingers within the grains themselves. When the wind shifts and the dunes rearrange, these echoes overlap and hum faintly beneath the surface. The desert becomes a symphony of memory, playing out across centuries. And perhaps this is why the sand produces the spice. Because memory, compressed under pressure, becomes consciousness. If we think of spice as awareness condensed into substance, then the sand is its womb, the great repository of time slowly distilling thought into form. Each storm, each worm, each death adds to the sediment of experience. The planet is not dead. It is dreaming beneath its own surface. The spice is that dream crystallized. When the Fremen walk the open desert, they read the dunes like text. To the untrained eye, every hill of sand looks the same, but to them, it's full of information. The way the wind curves a ridge, the softness of the top layer, the pitch of the vibration beneath their feet. These are words in the language of the planet. They can tell where the worms have passed, where the spice will rise, where the storms will form. The sand is their teacher, their scripture, their living map. From a theoretical point of view, the concept of sand memory reveals one of Dune's most profound ideas, that matter itself can store thought. The universe is not separate from awareness. It is awareness, slowed down until it becomes solid. In that sense, the desert is not just environment. It is consciousness spread thin, existing in physical form. Every grain is a particle of the planet's collective mind. This idea mirrors something ancient in human myth, that the earth itself remembers. In many traditions, the land keeps the imprint of everything that happens upon it, the joy, the pain, the struggle, the evolution. Dune takes that intuition and gives it literal form. The sand holds memory so densely that it begins to think. The entire planet becomes a vast subconscious field, dreaming through rhythm, heat and movement. When the sandworms move through it, they stir those memories, awakening old vibrations. The desert sings back to itself, a planet in conversation with its own past. That's why the Fremen never travel the dunes in mechanical rhythm until steady repetition disturbs the dream, calls the worm, invites awareness. To survive, they must move irregularly, as if improvising a dance with the consciousness beneath them. They do not walk on the desert, they walk with it. Paul Atreides learns this language over time. As Muad'Dib, he becomes fluent in the silence of sand. His visions, his prescience, they're not gifts from the spice alone. They are what happens when human awareness syncs perfectly with planetary memory. He learns to listen to what most beings ignore, the low vibration of the world thinking. That's why the desert feels alive around him. It responds not to his commands, but to his understanding. When he moves with intention, quietly, reverently, the sand accepts him. When he struggles against it, it resists. The relationship between Paul and the desert is the relationship between ego and awareness. The more he tries to control it, the more he loses himself. The more he listens, the more the world reveals its secrets. The spice produced by the collision of worm and sand is the physical result of that memory transforming. It's the planet's dream turned into something tangible, a way for consciousness to speak through matter. Those who consume it aren't merely enhancing their senses. They're integrating into that larger awareness, tasting the thoughts of a world that has been alive for millennia. But this connection is double-edged. To remember everything is to carry the weight of everything. That is the tragedy hidden within the beauty of awareness. The Fremen honour memory as sacred, but they also fear it. Too much remembrance can break the mind. Too much connection can dissolve individuality. The Bene Gesserit understand this danger intimately. When they awaken ancestral memory through the water of life, they risk being overwhelmed by it. One mind must contain 1,000, one voice must speak for generations. The desert knows this balance perfectly. It remembers, but it does not cling. The wind reshapes the dunes endlessly, erasing even as it preserves. Each storm wipes the surface clean, preparing for new imprints. In that constant motion lies wisdom, that memory must move to stay alive. Awareness, when still, becomes burden. When flowing, becomes freedom. The theory of sand memory also extends beyond Arrakis. If all matter carries vibration, if every particle records what it experiences, then the entire universe is a memory field. Every planet, every star, every grain of dust between galaxies could be storing awareness in different densities. The cosmos itself might be one vast consciousness, remembering its own creation through the slow rhythm of evolution. In this sense, Arrakis is not unique. It is a concentrated example, a mirror of a universal process. A world where the balance between destruction and creation, death and renewal, thought and form, has reached perfect resonance. The sand becomes the bridge between energy and memory, matter and mind. That's why the spice only exists here. It's not an accident. It's the inevitable product of consciousness folding inward upon itself until it becomes visible. Arrakis is what happens when a planet begins to dream consciously. The Fremen sense this truth instinctively. That's why they treat the sand with such reverence. When they build their setches, they shape the tunnels carefully, leaving the natural flow of the dunes undisturbed. They never waste water upon the sand, for they know it carries its own cycle of life. Even their burial rites, returning water to the tribe and body to the dust, reflect this harmony. To them, death is not loss. It is a form of remembering, and so the desert endures. It has watched civilizations rise, crumble, and be swallowed whole, yet it remains. It has seen gods born and forgotten. It has heard prayers, songs, screams, and silence, and it keeps them all. Every sound that has ever touched the sand still echoes within it. Every storm that has ever passed has added its rhythm to the symphony. The memory of sand, then, is not just the planet's secret. It is the universe's nature. To observe is to record. To exist is to remember. Arrakis is simply the first place we have listened closely enough to hear it. The next time the wind howls across the dunes, the Fremen say, "Listen carefully." Somewhere within that sound you might hear voices, ancient, patient, kind. The planet speaking through dust, the universe whispering through memory. For every grain of sand carries a thought. Every storm is a story retold. And beneath it all, still dreaming, still alive, the desert remembers us, just as we unknowingly remember it. Silence is not absence. On Arrakis, it is the deepest form of communication. It is how the desert listens, how the planet breathes, how the worms dream. The great sandworms, Shai-Hulud, move through the planet's crust like thoughts passing through the mind of a god. Their motion shapes everything, the dunes, the spice, the rhythm of the desert. But beneath that motion, there is a quiet so vast it feels infinite, a balance that carries weight, intention, and awareness. The Fremen say that when the worms are silent, the desert is listening, and when the desert listens, something sacred is about to awaken. Every vibration across the sand, a footstep, a heartbeat, a machine, sends ripples into this silence. The worms respond not in rage, but in recognition. They are drawn to rhythm because rhythm is life, and life disturbs stillness. Yet that stillness is what the worms protect. They are the guardians of silence, maintaining the balance between noise and harmony, between creation and destruction. When a Fremen rider mounts a worm, they are not conquering it, they are aligning themselves with it. To summon a worm, the Fremen use a rhythmic thumper, a steady beat that mimics the pulse of the world itself. But this is not domination, it is conversation. The rhythm says, "I am here, I remember." And the worm, feeling that familiar vibration, rises from the deep to meet the surface. In this act lies one of Dune's greatest metaphors, the relationship between awareness and stillness. The worm is consciousness in its most primal form, vast, unstoppable, beyond comprehension. The silence it keeps is not emptiness, it is potential. Just as thought arises from quiet, creation arises from stillness. The desert, through its worms, reminds us that power is not in motion alone. It is in the spaces between. Consider this. Every sound depends on silence to exist. Without quiet, there is no contrast, no meaning. The same is true for awareness. Without the void of stillness, thought cannot emerge. The sandworms embody this principle perfectly. They are motion and stillness intertwined, and destructive and sacred, violent and peaceful, all at once. To the Fremen, the silence of the worm is a living prayer. They say that before it appears, the air itself changes, the wind slows. The dunes tremble faintly like the surface of water before a ripple. Then, nothing. An almost holy pause where every sound vanishes. It is as if the world is holding its breath, and in that breath they feel presence, immense, ancient, aware. The Bene Gesserit studied this phenomenon for centuries but never understood it fully. They saw the worms as part of the spice cycle, biological and predictable. But to the Fremen, that explanation misses the point. The worm is not part of the cycle, it is the cycle. The silence it creates is the reset between worlds, the pause that allows existence to renew itself. Imagine a universe where every form of awareness and stars, planets, and species contributes to a single cosmic rhythm. When that rhythm becomes too chaotic, when life becomes too loud, balance must be restored. The sandworm's silence is that restoration. It swallows excess, consumes noise, returns movement to stillness. And from that stillness, new life, new awareness begins again. In this way, Shai-Hulud is both destroyer and creator. It devours everything, yet through that act, it gives back what was lost. Silence, the seedbed of renewal, the spice born from the worm's life and death, carries that essence of balance. It expands perception, but also demands surrender. It opens the mind to infinity, but reminds it of its limits. Every vision comes with the weight of stillness behind it, every revelation followed by silence. Paul Atreides understands this more deeply than anyone. As Muad'Dib, he hears not only the sounds of the desert, but the spaces between them. His prescient visions are not constant noise, they are patterns emerging from quiet. When he sees the possible futures unfolding, he hears them as variations of rhythm, the universe vibrating with endless potential. But beneath all those possibilities lies one steady tone, low and infinited. The silence of the worm. The baseline of existence itself. This is the paradox of enlightenment within the Dune universe. To reach ultimate awareness is not to fill the mind with knowledge, but to empty it. To hear everything, one must first listen to nothing. That is the lesson of the desert. The moment before the worm rises, the pause before revelation. The Fremen say that when the worm dies, its final vibration echoes across the dunes for days. The sound fades, but the stillness that follows remains for years. That stillness is not grief, it is gratitude. The death of the worm is not an ending, but a return. The silence it leaves behind becomes the womb of new life, the source of new spice, new dreams, new awareness. From a theoretical perspective, this cycle mirrors the act of consciousness itself. Every thought arises from stillness, expands into complexity, and dissolves back into silence. The sandworm is that process made visible, the externalization of awareness on a planetary scale. Its silence is not absence, but the presence of infinite potential. We might even think of Shai-Hulud as a metaphor for the mind of the universe. Each worm, each movement beneath the sand is a thought within that cosmic brain. Each eruption from below is a moment of awakening, an idea breaking the surface of time. And when the desert falls quiet again, it is not death. It is the universe thinking, slowly, patiently, eternally. The Fremen understand this intuitively. When they pray to the Great Maker, they do not ask for miracles. They ask for understanding, for Sosthaus, for alignment with the silence that shapes all things. They know that even sound, even life must one day return to stillness. When a Fremen dies, their body is given back to the desert. The moisture is reclaimed, the flesh returned to dust, and as the wind covers the spot where they once lay, the sand becomes silent again. That silence is remembrance, not of absence, but of unity, because to the desert, nothing is lost. Every voice, every movement, every life becomes part of the same deep stillness beneath the surface. The worms move within that silence like currents in an ocean, keeping balance within the eternal rhythm. They do not dominate the planet. They are its pulse, its memory, its awareness. Without them, the desert would fall asleep. With them, it dreams forever. The silence of the worm is the silence of the universe itself, vast, alive, unending. It is what existed before sound, before time, before thought, and it is what remains when all else fades away. The Fremen say that if you stand in the desert long enough, if you breathe deeply and listen with your whole being, you can feel it, a hum so low it is almost beneath hearing, a presence so vast it feels like peace. That is Shai Hulud. That is awareness waiting for another awakening. And in that infinite quiet, the desert whispers one eternal truth. All things that move must one day return to stillness. All sound must return to silence, and within that silence life begins again. At night, when both moons rise above Arrakis, the desert changes. The heat fades, the wind slows, and a pale silver glow spills across the dunes. The sand begins to shimmer, not brightly but softly, like a sleeping creature breathing in its sleep. For the Fremen, this is the sacred hour, the time of quiet revelation. They say that when the twin moons align, the veil between dream and reality thins. What was unseen becomes visible. What was hidden begins to speak. Under these moons, Paul Atreides often dreams. His visions stretch beyond time, past and future folding together, forming patterns too vast for the waking mind to hold. But these are not ordinary dreams. They are memories that have not yet happened. The desert shows him possibilities, reflections of what could be, all shimmering beneath the same pale light. The Fremen call these moments Rusikar al-Sehaya, the dreaming of the world. They believe that when the moons are full, the desert itself dreams through every being upon it. The sandworms move slower, the spice blooms in richer waves, and even the air feels heavy with thought. The entire planet enters a kind of trance. To walk the dunes during this time is to walk inside a vision. From a theoretical standpoint, these nights reveal one of Dune's deepest metaphors, that consciousness and the cosmos are reflections of each other. The twin moons are not simply celestial bodies, they are symbols of dual awareness. One represents the seen, the physical, the present moment. The other represents the unseen, the spiritual, the timeless, the subconscious. Together they illuminate the landscape of existence. Their light does not reveal new shapes, but reveals what was already there, waiting to be perceived. The Fremen say that dreams born under these moons are messages from the planet. The sand beneath them acts as a transmitter, carrying awareness upward through vibration. The moons, suspended like mirrors, reflect that awareness back down in the form of vision. Those who are sensitive to the rhythm, those whose minds are quiet enough to listen, can see these reflections with perfect clarity. Paul, already altered by spice and destiny, experiences these nights as communion. The desert speaks to him not in words, but in sensations, a deep hum running through his bones, visions unfolding like shifting dunes. He sees wars yet to come, rivers running where deserts should be, faces of people who do not yet exist. He sees the rise and fall of his own name, repeated through time like an echo. But beneath those visions he also senses something else, a calm, ancient awareness observing it all. The desert itself, perhaps, dreaming of its own transformation. It is as if Arrakis, through the moons, shows him its hopes and its fears. The planet, too, longs for balance. It wants to awaken, but it also knows the cost of awakening. It remembers every storm that has reshaped it, every hand that has tried to control it. Its dreams are not of conquest but of harmony. The Fremen elders understand this paradox. They know that the desert's dreams can be dangerous. To interpret them too literally is to invite madness. To ignore them is to remain blind. So they teach their children to listen to visions not for answers but for patterns. The truth is not in the image, but in the rhythm beneath it. When Paul dreams of jihad spreading across the stars, he understands that this is not a prophecy of one event. It is the cycle of awareness itself. Every civilization dreams of salvation, then awakens into violence, then falls back into sleep. The universe expands and contracts like breath. The moons, rising and setting, mirror that pulse perfectly. Each night they appear anew, yet each night they carry the memory of their last ascent. From this perspective, Dune becomes less a story of empire and more a meditation on time itself. The twin moons remind us that existence is both repetition and renewal. History moves in circles, not lines. Every dream, no matter how vivid, will one day fade. But its echo will remain, reshaping what comes next. The spice visions that Paul experiences are fragments of this same cycle. They are not glimpses of a fixed destiny, but waves of potential collapsing into being. The spice allows the mind to perceive these waves, to see how the thought becomes matter, and matter becomes memory. The moons amplify this process, their light acting as a kind of lens that focuses the desert's awareness into form. Imagine the surface of Arrakis as a neural network, each grain of sand a point of memory, each worm a synapse of movement. The moons act as the hemispheres of a vast planetary brain, the right and left sides of awareness, reflecting and balancing each other. The light they cast is thought, flowing endlessly between body and spirit, between matter and dream. Paul's awakening beneath these moons is not an isolated miracle. It is evolution. The planet, through him, learns to see itself. His visions are not divine gifts. They are the universe recognizing itself through human eyes. That is the secret buried within the theory of Dune. Consciousness expands by finding mirrors in matter. Every planet, every creature, every star is both observer and observed. But even awareness carries shadow. The more clearly Paul sees, the more he realizes how fragile perception can be. Each vision of the future threatens to overwrite the present. Each dream risks becoming a prison. The moons above him, once symbols of guidance, begin to feel like eyes watching endlessly, reflecting every possibility but never granting peace. Awareness, once a gift, becomes weight. The Fremen have a name for this burden: Tarik Tim, the brightness that blinds. They warn that those who stare too long into the light of the moons will forget the ground beneath their feet. The desert, after all, values balance. It gives visions, but also demands humility. The Fremen bow their heads when the moons are at their brightest, not in worship, but in respect for the unknown. Paul learns this lesson slowly. As the Empire expands in his name, his visions grow louder, more chaotic. The moons that once guided him now mirror his own turmoil. Each night their light feels heavier, pressing down on him, as though the desert itself is reminding him that no being can hold all awareness without breaking. Even the planet, with all its memory and silence, relies on darkness to rest. And so, beneath the twin moons of Arrakis, Paul begins to understand what the desert has been teaching all along, that every vision, no matter how vast, must eventually dissolve back into silence. That even light needs shadow to exist. The moons rise, the moons fall, dreams awaken, then fade. Awareness expands, then returns to stillness. In the calm that follows each revelation, the desert remains, patient, breathing, alive. It does not cling to its visions, it lets them pass like wind over dunes, knowing that what matters is not what is seen, but what continues beneath the surface. The Fremen end each night's prayer with the same simple phrase: the moons watch, the sand remembers. Because beneath every dream, beneath every prophecy, beneath every flicker of awareness, the desert waits, silent and eternal, ready to dream again. Light creates form, but shadow gives it meaning. Without shadow there is no depth, no contrast, no awareness of shape or boundary. In the endless brightness of Arrakis' twin suns, the desert itself teaches this lesson daily. It blinds those who stare too long, it burns away detail until only silence remains. But when the moons rise, when darkness softens the dunes, and outlines return, the world becomes visible again, not because of the light, but because of what the light does not touch. In the philosophy of the Fremen, shadow is sacred. They call it tichna, the mercy of the sun. It is not the absence of light, but its balance. To them, even the harshest day carries gentleness within it. The shade beneath a rock, the cool curve of a dune, the whisper of a storm cloud passing overhead. Each small pocket of darkness is a promise that the world still remembers harmony. From a theoretical standpoint, this principle is central to Dune's universe. Awareness expands only when it meets resistance. Consciousness requires contrast to know itself. Just as sound needs silence, thought needs uncertainty. The spice awakens the mind, but it also reveals the burden of clarity, the pain of seeing too much. The more Paul Atreides understands, the more he confronts the darkness his knowledge creates. His prescient visions do not show him perfection, they show him consequence. Every act of power casts a shadow, every revolution births a new form of oppression. The jihad that rises in his name is not born of malice, but of momentum, the shadow of enlightenment. Humanity, through him, reaches for transcendence and instead finds reflection. The more it worships him as a god, the more it forgets its own divinity. This is not a failure. It is pattern. The universe grows through shadow, it learns through imbalance. The desert demonstrates this endlessly. When the wind carves a dune, it creates one side of light and one of shade. Both are necessary. Without contrast, the dune collapses into dust. The same is true for awareness. Too much light, too much certainty, too much control dissolves meaning. Shadow gives structure. Doubt gives wisdom. The Fremen live by this law. Their homes are carved deep within the rock, where light enters only in thin, golden lines. They say that in shadow one remembers humility, that the brightest truths are seen only from darkness. Their rituals, performed in candlelight or beneath the moons, are designed not to banish the dark, but to embrace it. They understand what empires forget, that creation and destruction are not opposites, but partners in the same dance. To the Bene Gesserit, shadow has another meaning, the genetic memory of all who came before. The other memory, as they call it, is a labyrinth of awareness stretching back through centuries of life. Within it are not only wisdom and beauty, but fear, violence, desire, and grief. Every enlightenment carries the echo of its opposite. This is why their training emphasizes balance, not purity, but acceptance. To reject darkness is to reject half of existence, and yet even they fear what lies too deep within the shadow. They fear the abomination, the mind consumed by ancestral voices, the self lost to the collective. In this fear we find the central paradox of Dune's philosophy. Humanity craves connection but trembles before total unity. We want to know everything but not become everything. The shadow, therefore, is the boundary that keeps awareness human. Paul experiences this truth firsthand. As his consciousness expands, he begins to see the universe as a single unfolding thought. He senses the pulse of every life connected through spice and memory. But the deeper he goes, the more he loses his sense of self. Each vision blurs the line between observer and observed. He begins to fear that awareness, if complete, might erase identity altogether, that enlightenment might mean dissolution. This fear is the birth of shadow within him. It is what anchors his humanity, even as he becomes myth. The prophet must doubt to remain real. Without that doubt, he becomes merely another extension of the planet's will, another echo in the desert's dream. His internal conflict between knowing and being, between vision and self, mirrors the cosmic conflict of creation itself. In this way, Dune transforms from a story of politics into a theory of consciousness. The entire saga becomes a meditation on the interplay between light and shadow, awareness and limitation, destiny and choice. Every element of the world reflects this duality. The spice grants sight but blinds peace. The worm destroys but also renews. The desert erases but also remembers. The empire unites but also imprisons. Even the moons above Arrakis mirror this truth. One bright, one dim, each necessary for the other's existence. They circle endlessly, never touching, never separating, bound in perfect balance. The Fremen poets describe the birth of shadow in their songs. They sing of the first dawn when light flooded the world so completely that nothing could move. The land cried out for mercy, and from that plea came the first shadow, the first rest from brightness, the first moment of reflection. They say that this is when thought began, when awareness learned to pause and listen. Shadow in this sense is not darkness at all, it is attention. To be conscious is to cast a shadow. Every thought creates contrast. Every dream defines its own boundary. The key is not to destroy the shadow, but to understand it, to see it as reflection, not enemy. The Bene Gesserit whisper a mantra, "In my darkness, I find form." It is a recognition that limitation gives meaning. Without hunger, there is no satisfaction. Without loss, no memory. Without mortality, no purpose. And so the desert teaches through shadow. The travellers who walk under the blazing sun learn to seek shelter not from fear, but from respect. The shade of a rock is a gift, the pause between breaths, the reminder that life endures because it knows when to rest. Even the worms, born of fire and spice, retreat into darkness between their journeys, vanishing into the cool depths of the sand, silent and unseen. From a metaphysical angle, the birth of shadow might represent the universe's first act of self-awareness. In the moment that existence looked inward and saw itself, duality was born. Light and darkness became two halves of a single thought. Every being since then, every world, every mind continues that rhythm, expanding, reflecting, and returning. Paul, standing beneath the twin moons, realizes that this rhythm cannot be broken. Every prophecy, every empire, every act of rebellion, all are shadows of the same eternal process. The future will always contain its opposite. Enlightenment will always birth ignorance. Life will always carry death. The Fremen accept this with grace. They do not fear the shadow, they walk beside it. They know that when the suns rise again, it will follow, silent, patient, constant. And perhaps this is what the desert has been teaching all along, that the shadow is not a flaw in the design, but the design itself, that awareness grows only through contrast, that perfection without darkness would mean nothing. So when night returns and the dunes are once again draped in silver, the Fremen bow their heads and whisper a quiet truth. Light gave birth to shadow, and shadow keeps the light alive. Because in the end, even the brightest star needs the darkness to shine. And the desert, timeless, infinite, awareable, knows that the balance between them is the heartbeat of creation itself. Empires never truly die. Their voices linger, faint, distorted, carried by the wind of time. Even when their walls crumble, their language survives in the silence between generations. On Arrakis, this is known as the whispering. To the Fremen, every empire leaves behind a resonance, not in monuments, but in minds. The echoes of command, the rhythm of belief, the shape of fear, all continue to hum within the collective memory of humanity. These are not ghosts in the supernatural sense, they are frequencies, vibrations that remain long after the original sound has faded. The desert keeps them all. The Whispering Empire is the continuation of every voice that tried to rule it. The Atreides, the Harkonnens, the Corrinnos, their ambitions dissolve into dust, but their patterns remain. The dunes still shift according to the weight of their footsteps. The wind still carries fragments of their intent. Nothing is ever lost, it simply changes form. From a theoretical perspective, this is one of Dune's most profound truths, that history is a living organism, not timeline. Each action, each decision sends ripples into the future that never fully dissipate. Like spice drifting through the air, these echoes become part of the world's breath. People inhale them unknowingly, ideas disguised as instinct, memories disguised as destiny. Paul's empire, though gone in form, survives as vibration. His name becomes a whisper that refuses to fade. For the faithful it is more prayer, for the fearful warning, for the philosophers paradox. Muad'Dib becomes less a man than a frequency, one that oscillates endlessly between salvation and destruction. The Fremen have a saying, every word becomes wind. It means that nothing spoken truly disappears. Sound becomes air, air becomes movement, movement becomes shape. Over time, the whisper becomes the desert itself, infinite, shifting, eternal. In this sense, the empire of Muad'Dib never ended. It simply transformed. The people who once followed him now carry fragments of his dream in their stories, their rituals, their silence. The desert speaks his memory each time the wind sweeps across the dunes. and somewhere in that soundless murmur the universe continues to remember. Paul knew this would happen. His prescience showed him not only battles and victories, but the afterimage of his own myth. He saw that awareness, once unleashed, cannot be contained. Even as he withdrew from the world, the whisper of his existence grew louder, passed down through faith, rewritten through time. The prophet became legend, and legend became law. But here lies the deeper theory. The whisper is not merely history, it is feedback. The universe itself learns through echo. Each thought sent into it returns transformed. The Empire is not a monument built of stone, it is a dialogue between awareness and time. Every civilization that rises becomes part of this conversation, speaking into the void and listening for an answer. The Fremen say that the desert repeats what is worth remembering. If a story fades, it means the world has learned its lesson. If it returns, it means the lesson remains unfinished. By that measure, the tale of Paul Atreides is not over. It continues, whispered through the spice, carried in the rhythm of storms. To the Bene Gesserit, this phenomenon is known as the persistence of pattern. They understand that human history is cyclical not by mistake, but by design. Awareness expands until it forgets itself, then contracts, waiting to rediscover what it once knew. Empires, religions, revolutions, all are manifestations of this oscillation. Each whisper is a reminder that consciousness cannot escape its own rhythm. This is why every great power eventually mirrors the one it replaced. The Harkonnens ruled through cruelty, the Atreides through vision, the Fremen through faith. Yet all became bound by the same gravity, the belief that order could outlast change. The desert, patient and vast, watched them all crumble, not out of malice but necessity. Balance demands impermanence. Still, the whispers remain. Sometimes, when a sandstorm rises and the air hums with static, the Fremen swear they can hear voices, the faint echo of old chants, old cries, old promises. They do not fear it, they listen, because in the whisper lies wisdom. The past speaks not to haunt, but to guide. From a scientific viewpoint, even this could make sense. Sound waves, like energy, never truly vanish. They disperse, weaken, merge into the background hum of the planet. On Arrakis, where the sand itself is alive with vibration, those echoes could literally persist, imprinted within the dunes. The desert becomes a kind of cosmic recorder, preserving the resonance of every moment. And so, when the wind shifts, carrying that deep, low murmur across the horizon, what one hears may be more than mere noise. It may be history breathing, awareness repeating itself softly, endlessly. The Fremen believe that one day the whispers will fall silent, not because the past has been forgotten, but because understanding has finally been achieved. Silence, in their belief, is the final state of wisdom. When all lessons have been learned, when the cycle completes, there will be no need for echo, only peace. But until that day, the Empire continues to whisper, through the hearts of believers, through the spice that carries memory, through the dreams of those who still walk the dunes. Every grain of sand holds a voice, every gust of wind carries intent. Every night beneath the twin moons, the planet hums with stories, fragments of what once was, reflections of what may come again. The universe, through Arrakis, reminds us of one essential truth, that nothing truly ends because nothing truly begins. All things are motion. All motion leaves echo. The Whispering Empire is not a warning or a prophecy. It is a map, a record of how consciousness moves through form. Power becomes memory, memory becomes myth, myth becomes vibration, and vibration becomes silence again. The circle continues, and if one listens closely and not with ears, but with awareness, one can still hear it. The faint rhythm beneath the wind, the quiet murmur of all who have come before, the breath of the desert, repeating a single truth through eternity. Empires fall, but awareness remains. Because the real empire was never built from stone or faith or armies. It was built from memory, the most enduring material in the universe. And long after the cities have turned to dust, long after the stars themselves have cooled, that memory will still whisper softly across the dunes, reminding the cosmos that it once dreamed of itself through the lives of men. The empire had fallen, but the desert remained. And from that stillness, from the silence left behind by gods and kings, new voices began to rise, softer, younger, unburdened by the echoes of conquest. They were called the Children of the Desert. Born into a world where the myth of Muad'Dib was no longer history but memory, they grew up surrounded by whispers, faint lingering traces of something vast and ancient. The wind carried the scent of spice and the ghosts of old prayers, yet these children did not kneel. They listened, they learned, they questioned. The Fremen elders said they carried the second sight, not through spice or prophecy, but through intuition, an inherited awareness born from generations of survival. They did not see the future as Paul once did. Instead, they felt its rhythm in the shifting of the dunes, the movement of the worms, the trembling balance of life and death. To them, the desert was not sacred because of the past. It was sacred because it was alive, now, in every moment. From a theoretical perspective, this generation represents the natural evolution of awareness after transcendence. When the collective mind of humanity reaches too far, too fast, when it burns itself in the light of prophecy, it must return to simplicity to survive. The children of the desert are that return. They are awareness learning humility again. They live differently than their ancestors. They no longer build great empires, no longer seek to dominate the stars. Their society moves like wind, shifting, adaptive, patient. They do not hoard water or wealth, they circulate it. Everything flows just as time flows. In this, they have rediscovered what the old Fremen once knew, that survival is not control but cooperation. Their rituals reflect this new balance. When a child is born, the tribe gathers not to name them but to listen. They wait in silence for the sound of the wind passing over the dunes, and whatever tone it carries becomes the child's name. They believe the desert itself chooses their identity, that the universe, through its rhythm, assigns each person a note in its infinite song. This way of life is both simple and profound. To outsiders it may look primitive. To the Fremen, it is enlightenment returned to earth. The children of the desert have no need for spice-induced visions or political prophecy. They walk in awareness naturally, as though the planet's consciousness has merged fully with their own. Their wisdom comes not from knowledge, but from presence. There is a theory among the historians of the Spacing Guild that these children represent the next stage of human evolution, not physically, but spiritually. They have become extensions of Arrakis itself, their minds attuned to the vibrations of sand and sky. When they sleep, their dreams are not private. They dream in harmony. The wind that moves across one camp seems to whisper into another. Thoughts travel like echoes, soft but unmistakable. The Bene Gesserit, observing from afar, call them the harmonic generation. To them, these new Fremen are proof that consciousness adapts not through control but through surrender. When humanity's ambition finally burned out, when the last empire dissolved into silence, awareness did not end. It diffused. It spread through the desert like moisture through air. The children of the desert do not see themselves as chosen or superior. They see themselves as caretakers of balance. Their songs are prayers not for salvation but for continuity. They sing to remind the desert to breathe, to remind the worms to move, to remind themselves that existence is not struggle but participation. At night, when the moons hang low and the dunes glow silver, they tell stories, not of Muad'Dib as emperor or prophet, but as listener. They say that before he became myth, Paul sat alone in the desert for many nights, not asking for visions, but for silence. In that silence he heard the world speaking, and he became part of its dream. For the children, this is the true legacy of Muad'Dib. Not his wars, not his empire, but his listening. The older generation sometimes struggles to understand this new calm. They fear that without struggle, without sacrifice, meaning will fade. But the children do not seek meaning in conflict. They find it in observation. They say the universe no longer needs saviors, only witnesses, those who can see without judging, who can walk without disturbing. This philosophy gives rise to a new form of leadership, one based not on command, but on resonance. The leaders among them, called Hamatu or echo-bearers, are chosen not for their strength, but for their ability to listen to the voice of the desert without speaking over it. They spend years in solitude, attuning themselves to the faint hum beneath the dunes, the living frequency of the planet's thought. When they return, their words carry a weight that is not their own, as if the desert itself speaks through them. In a sense, this new Fremen culture embodies the completion of the cycle that began with the spice. The spice opened the mind, the Empire expanded it, the collapse purified it, and the children restore it. They are the synthesis of awareness and humility, of vision and silence. Their society may seem small, but it functions like the desert itself, vast in purpose, invisible in intent. From a broader philosophical view, this represents the universe's way of balancing extremes. When enlightenment becomes obsession, the pendulum swings back to innocence. When awareness becomes arrogance, it returns to stillness. The children of the desert live within that stillness, embodying a consciousness that no longer needs to reach for control because it already belongs to everything. And yet even this balance is temporary. They know that the desert changes. They know that water will one day flow, that the sands will bloom with green. The old prophecies of terraforming, whispered for generations, have begun again, not as ambition, but as curiosity. The children dream of walking through forests that still remember the rhythm of dunes. They wonder what new awareness will rise when the desert finally becomes garden. But they do not rush the change. They move slowly, with the patience of wind, knowing that every transformation must honour its origin. They tend the land not as conquerors, but as translators, interpreting the thoughts of a world still half asleep, still dreaming through spice and sand. In their eyes, the future is not a destination. It is a continuation of listening. At dawn, when the sun first touches the dunes, they stand in silence. The wind moves between them, carrying the faint hum of the desert, a vibration felt more than heard. And in that soundless communion they understand what their ancestors once struggled to grasp, that the universe is not asking to be ruled, nor even to be understood. It is asking to be remembered, and they, the children of the desert, are its memory made flesh, the living proof that awareness, once awakened, never dies. They will grow, they will change, and in time they too will fade, but their silence, that sacred listening stillness, will remain. Because the desert never forgets its children. It only waits for them to return again and again with the wind. It begins quietly, no storm, no revelation, just a shift in the wind. The air, once dry and sharp, grows softer. The mornings smell different, less of dust, more of life. Dew gathers on stones where there was once only sand. For the first time in countless generations, the desert exhales moisture. The children of the desert call it the remembering. To them, this is not a miracle, it is memory awakening. They say the planet has finally begun to recall what it once was, a world of rivers and oceans where life sang through air and soil. The desert was never punishment, it was silence. A long pause in the planet's story waiting for understanding to return. Now, the silence is breaking. The transformation does not come from machines or grand designs. It begins through rhythm, through patience. The Fremen do not flood the sands. They whisper to them. They plant seeds with ceremony, each grain of water measured, each movement guided by intuition. The desert responds slowly, cautiously, like an old being stirring from a deep dream. Tiny shoots emerge between the dunes, fragile, green, trembling in the wind. The first to rise are the memory plants, long dormant beneath the surface. Their roots reach deep into forgotten aquifers, drinking from water that has not touched the sun in centuries. These plants carry within them a genetic archive, a memory of what once was. Their leaves unfold like pages, revealing the old script of life. From a theoretical perspective, this transformation is not simply ecological, it is psychological. The planet is mirroring consciousness itself. Just as awareness evolves from silence into understanding, Arrakis evolves from desert into garden. The process is not about adding something new, but about remembering what was always there. The Fremen understand this deeply. They know that change without remembrance is destruction. So as the desert blooms, they hold ceremonies of memory, songs that recall the time of pure sand, the age of worms, the silence of the deep dunes. They promise never to forget the harshness that made them wise. In their philosophy, the garden is not victory, it is balance restored. Every plant that grows is a note in a larger harmony. Every drop of rain is a word spoken in the language of renewal. And still the desert remains beneath it all, though not gone, but resting. They call this new world Arrakis, the remembering earth. Paul's legend too begins to shift with the land. No longer a god, no longer a conqueror, he becomes a symbol of transformation itself. The children speak of him not as Muad'Dib the Emperor, but as the seed-bearer, the one who carried awareness into the soil of time so that new life could grow. His story becomes less about prophecy and more about process. The myth evolves as the world evolves. The Bene Gesserit record this change with quiet fascination. For centuries, they believed control was the key to survival, genetic, political, spiritual control. But Arrakis proves another truth, that surrender is a greater power. The desert, once feared for its mercilessness, transforms through patience. It teaches that life, when trusted, finds its own path. In time, the first rivers return. They do not crash or carve violently, they glide, as if remembering the old roots of their ancestors. The worms, sensing the change, retreat deeper into the sand. They are not dying, they are dreaming. Their silence becomes sacred again, a hidden pulse beneath the green. The spice becomes rarer, more precious, but its essence remains. Awareness still hums in the wind, subtler now, softer bisan, like a thought whispered through leaves instead of sand. The children of the desert adapt effortlessly. Their dwellings move closer to the water but never far from the dunes. They call themselves the keepers of memory. They plant gardens in spirals, not rows, imitating the natural patterns of wind and worm. Every settlement is a living echo of the desert's geometry, curved, flowing, organic. And yet, with renewal comes danger. The Bene Gesserit warn that abundance breeds forgetfulness. They know that comfort dulls awareness, that plenty silences the lessons of scarcity. The children listen but do not fear. They have built their society around remembrance. The desert lives within them. They carry it in their silence, in their rituals, in the rhythm of their speech. When rain falls for the first time in generations, the entire tribe stands outside to witness it. They do not dance or shout. They open their hands and let the droplets touch their skin, each one a memory, each one a reminder that even the sky remembers. The elders weep quietly, the children laugh, and somewhere beneath their feet the sand shifts in contentment. From a metaphysical standpoint, this moment is the culmination of the planet's awakening, a literal convergence of matter and consciousness. The rain represents reflection, the physical manifestation of awareness looking back upon itself. Every drop is a mirror, every pool a memory reawakened. The world at last sees its own face again. But the Fremen do not see the garden as an ending. They see it as another beginning, a new rhythm in the eternal cycle of change. The dunes will return one day, the worms will rise again, the swans will come back as it always does, and that is not tragedy. It is continuity. In the stories told around the new fires, the children recite an old proverb reborn. The garden remembers the desert, and the desert remembers the sea. It means that no state of being is permanent. Every form contains the memory of what it was and the potential of what it will be. The universe itself, they say, moves through these stages endlessly, awakening, resting, dreaming, awakening again. In this realization lies the essence of Dune's final theory, that consciousness is not progress, but rhythm. Every rise requires a fall, every bloom requires decay. The desert's silence was never absence, it was preparation. The garden's beauty is not triumph, it is remembrance. As twilight falls across the new world, the children walk the dunes that remain, feeling the cool wind moving over sand and grass alike. They whisper to the earth, thanking it for remembering, promising never to forget. And when night comes, they look up at the moons, the same moons that once watched over endless sand, and they see them reflected in the surface of the new waters. Two circles of light, one above, one below, heaven remembering earth. And in that reflection, they understand the final lesson of Arrakis, that memory is creation, that silence is not death, but the space between breaths, that even when life changes form, the essence remains, listening, learning, becoming. The garden blooms not as conquest but as confession, a world admitting to itself that it was always alive, always aware, always waiting to remember. When the first rains began to fall, the worms retreated. No one saw them go. There was no thunder, no trembling of the ground, only silence, a deep and endless silence. The Fremen say they descended into the oldest layers of the world, curling within the earth like great circles of thought returning to themselves. They call this time the long sleep, The Bene Gesserit record it differently. In their chronicles, it is a geological event, the worms adapting to moisture, retreating to drier regions to preserve their biology. But the Fremen understand what the records cannot describe, that this was not instinct, but will. The worms did not flee, they were meditating. In the quiet that followed, the desert changed. The sands grew still, the endless hum beneath the surface faded, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Yet beneath the blooming gardens and winding rivers, beneath the roots of new life, something continued to pulse. Slow, steady, steady, patient. The awareness of the worms had not vanished. It had gone inward. To the children of the desert, this was not an ending. It was balance. They believed the worms were dreaming and dreaming the garden into existence. The rain was their breath, the wind their whisper, the growth of green their thought made visible. Even in rest, the great makers continued to shape the world. From a theoretical perspective, the sleep of the worms marks a turning point in the consciousness of Arrakis. For millennia, the planet had expressed its awareness through motion, storms, vibrations, the constant rhythm of the sand. Now, awareness shifted form. It became stillness, a planetary meditation. The same intelligence that once roared through the desert now listened from below, observing the transformation it had long prepared for. This cycle mirrors the evolution of thought itself. Consciousness alternates between expression and rest, between creation and reflection. Every civilization, every mind, every planet must eventually sleep to renew its dream. The worms, in their retreat, embody this universal rhythm, the moment when energy withdraws not from exhaustion, but from completion. The Fremen elders understood this better than any scholar. They taught that the worms were not gone, but transformed into memory, diffused through the land like the spice once was through air. Their silence was the hum beneath the roots, the pulse within the rivers, the faint vibration when one stood barefoot on the earth at dawn. They said that if you listened carefully, you could still hear them breathing, a deep subterranean rhythm that rose and fell like the tides of thought. That sound was the memory of awareness itself, still alive, still dreaming beneath the soil. Over time, the children began to adapt their rituals to this new reality. Where once they danced to summon the worms, now they sang to honor their rest. Their songs carried no urgency, no pleading for revelation, only gratitude. The melodies flowed like water, slow and continuous, acknowledging that stillness is also movement, only on a different scale. They began to speak of the sleeping gods not as deities to be awakened, but as guardians preserving the balance of life. The worms, they said, were not extinct. They had simply withdrawn to allow the world above to learn peace. Their absence was a gift, a silence deep enough for humanity to hear itself again. The Bene Gesserit watched this transformation with quiet awe. For centuries they had sought to control evolution, guiding human destiny through bloodlines and prophecy. But Arrakis had done what no order could. It had evolved through surrender. The worms, in choosing sleep, demonstrated the ultimate mastery of power, restraint. They proved that awareness, once awakened, does not need to dominate. It can simply be. From this perspective, the sleep of the worms becomes the universe's meditation on humility. Power rests because it trusts itself. Knowledge pauses because it knows it will return. In silence, the world remembers how to listen. Years pass, then decades. The desert changes colour. The sands grow paler, the dunes lower, the rivers spread. Life multiplies. Insects, birds, small mammals. The children of the desert adapt with it, moving further into the balance between memory and renewal. They speak often of the day the worms will awaken again, not with fear, not with longing, but with calm certainty. When the garden forgets its silence, they say, the desert will return to remind it. There is a legend told among them about the last worm seen before the rains. It is said that one night, under the twin moons, a young Fremen boy wandered into the deep dunes alone. There he saw a ripple in the sand, a movement vast and slow. The ground lifted, and a single golden eye rose from the darkness, immense, ancient, filled with light. The boy did not run. He stood silently, breathing with the desert. The worm did not strike or retreat. It simply looked at him. In that gaze, the boy felt the weight of every age, the wars, the faith, the silence, the waiting. Then, without a sound, the worm sank beneath the earth again. When the boy returned to his tribe, he said only one thing: "The desert is not gone, it is resting inside us." That story became scripture. It spread through the tribes, through the valleys, through the green fields that once were dunes. The Fremen repeated it to their children as a reminder and promise that awareness never disappears, it only changes form. The worms in their sleep were not absent. They were everywhere now, in the air, in the water, in the rhythm of hearts. Scientists of later generations would describe this as ecological equilibrium, the planet redistributing its energy. But to the Fremen, it was something far more profound, the merging of spirit and matter, of desert and life. They understood that the worms had become the world itself. Diffused consciousness, omnipresent, eternal, and perhaps they were right. For even as the planet bloomed, faint traces of spice continued to rise from the soil, not as harvest, but as scent, a subtle reminder that the dream of the desert still breathed beneath the roots. The air carried a golden haze at dawn, shimmering softly before dispersing into the light. It was as if the world exhaled memory each morning. In time, the Fremen came to call this golden dawn Shea Timur, the breath of the sleeping worm. They said it was a sign that the planet's awareness still watched, still dreamed, still waited, and when travellers stood in that light, eyes closed, they felt a strange peace, a sense of being remembered, because that was the gift of the desert, and of the worms who had shaped it, the understanding that rest is not the end of purpose, that stillness is not death but the space between thoughts. The worms sleep not in exile but in trust, knowing that life will one day need silence again. When the noise of abundance grows too loud, when awareness forgets its balance, the sand will rise, and the world will remember the sound of its own heartbeat. Until then, the planet breathes in calm rhythm. The desert dreams through gardens, and beneath it all the great makers sleep, not gone, not lost, but listening, patient as eternity itself. Time on Arrakis moves differently now. It does not rush, it does not repeat. It circles slowly, endlessly, like the wind tracing its own path across the horizon. The gardens have grown tall, the rivers have widened, the people of the desert have learned to live with abundance, and yet, beneath all that green, beneath the roots and the hum of new life, something stirs. It begins as a feeling, faint at first, like a pulse under the soil. The children of the desert notice it before anyone else. They feel it in their feet as they walk, a low vibration that doesn't belong to the rivers or the trees. The old ones recognize it immediately. The desert, they say, is breathing again. Generations have passed since the worms fell into their long sleep. Few remember the hum of their movement, the thunder of their passing. For most they are myth now, figures of story and prayer. But the elders, those who still sit in silence before dawn, have always known this day would come. Nothing stays still forever, not even silence. The Fremen have a saying, even the still wind waits to move. It means that balance is not permanence, it is motion slowed to understanding. The world cannot remain garden forever. It must exhale what it once inhaled. Life must give way to rest, and so it begins again. At first, the change is invisible. The rains grow slightly lighter each season. The soil begins to dry faster. The grasses lose their deep green, turning to bronze beneath the twin suns. The rivers recede, leaving behind ribbons of cracked earth that shimmer like mirrors in the heat. And in the distance, on the far edge of the horizon, the air begins to blur, waves of heat bending light the way the desert once did. The children do not panic. They remember the teachings of their ancestors, the cycles of awakening and rest, the breathing of the planet. They gather their water, their seeds, their stories, and wait. Waiting, they know, is part of understanding. From a theoretical point of view, this is the natural equilibrium of a conscious world. Arrakis, in its new abundance, begins to remember its old rhythm. Life, having stretched too far toward one extreme, returns to balance by shifting back. The sands are not punishment. They are renewal. The desert's way of preserving awareness through contrast. The Bene Gesserit scholars, watching from distant observatories, debate endlessly about this phenomenon. Some call it regression, others call it evolution, but the Fremen, in their simplicity, call it memory. The desert remembers itself, they say. It was never gone, only dreaming beneath the garden. As the years pass, the changes grow undeniable. Dust storms rise where none have in generations, trees bow under the weight of wind. The sky grows pale with sand carried from distant plains. At first, the children see this as sadness, a beauty being undone, but slowly they begin to understand the beauty was never in the permanence of the garden, but in its transience. The worms return as whispers first, small vibrations in the deep dunes, patterns in the sand that seem too deliberate to be mere wind. Hunters report hearing low, echoing sounds beneath their feet. Not thunder, not movement, but something deeper, slower. Awareness turning in its sleep. And then, one morning, the horizon moves. A wave of sand rises in the distance, silent and vast. The air shimmers around it. Birds take flight. The ground trembles, not with violence, but with recognition. The first worm in centuries breaches the surface, its skin gold as sunlight, its body immense as memory itself. The children fall to their knees. Some cry, others laugh. No one speaks. The sound of its passage fills the world, a deep, resonant hum that feels like the heartbeat of the planet awakening. But this return is not like the past. The worm does not devour, does not destroy. It moves gently, almost reverently, carving through the sand like a dream-given shape. It circles the dunes once, then disappears again beneath the surface, leaving behind silence. The people understand the message. The desert has not come to erase the garden. It has come to remind it. From that day onward, the balance becomes visible again. The rains come and go in rhythm. Green and gold coexist. Oases surrounded by dunes, rivers winding through sand. The worms rise and rest according to the season, guardians rather than masters. The world has achieved what it had always sought, awareness in harmony, life and stillness intertwined. In the centuries that follow, new philosophers emerge from the children's line. They speak not of domination or prophecy, but of resonance, the belief that the universe breathes through all things and that the role of life is not to conquer, but to synchronize. Their teaching spread quietly through the stars, reaching worlds that have long forgotten silence. These new thinkers call themselves the listeners. Their symbol is not the worm, not the garden, but the spiral, the shape of eternal return. They believe that awareness expands through repetition, that every world must learn its lesson through cycles of growth and decline, noise and stillness, empire and desert. The listeners teach that Arrakis is not unique. It is a reflection of a universal truth. Every planet, every civilization, carries within it both desert and garden, both silence and voice, both worm and seed. The key to survival is remembering that neither state is superior. Each prepares the way for the other. Back on Arrakis, the children continue to live simply. They travel between dunes and fields, tending both sand and soil. They plant in spirals, harvest in silence, and celebrate through listening. They no longer seek to predict the future. They trust the rhythm of the world. At night, they tell stories of the worm's return. The children listen with wide eyes as the elders describe the great hum beneath their feet. The sound that felt like peace. The worm is not a god, they say softly. It is what happens when the world remembers itself. The Bene Gesserit archives record this era as the time of balance. It lasts for centuries, an age without war, without empire, without prophecy. The people live as part of the dream rather than trying to shape it. For the first time in history, humanity and planet share awareness completely, a state not of enlightenment, but of harmony. And when the moons rise together, casting silver light over the dunes and rivers alike, the entire world glows, half gold, half green, like two halves of one thought. The worms move beneath the surface, their silence merging with the hum of wind and water. Above them, the stars shimmer like grains of sand scattered across the infinite. The desert at last has found its reflection, and in that reflection, the universe sees itself, alive, patient, eternal. For Arrakis has taught what no empire, no prophet, no god could ever teach, that creation is not a march toward perfection. It is a circle, an endless, breathing memory of balance. And as the first light of dawn spreads across the dunes, the people whisper their oldest truth once more. The desert returns, and so do we. Because all things that live must one day rest. All things that rest must one day awaken. And every silence, no matter how deep, eventually remembers its voice. The universe does not move in straight lines. It turns gently and endlessly, folding upon itself like the dunes of Arrakis beneath the shifting wind. Time, too, follows this shape. Not an arrow, not a path, but a spiral. Each revolution returns to where it began, but never quite the same. It remembers, it changes, it learns. On Arrakis, this truth is not theory. It is life itself. Every generation sees the same sun, walks the same sand, breathes the same air, yet each experiences it differently. The Fremen say the desert spins in memory, always circling longing towards the understanding. The spiral is the shape of existence, the pattern through which awareness grows without ever breaking its rhythm. The children of the desert have long understood this. They mark the passing of years not with calendars, but with spirals carved into stone. Each ring represents a cycle of rain and drought, of silence and song, of life and rest. When one spiral ends, another begins within it, smaller, closer to the center. They believe this is how consciousness itself evolves, not outward into infinity, but inward, toward depth. To them, enlightenment is not expansion. It is return. The Bene Gesserit records similar insights in their chronicles. They speak of genetic memory as a spiral, the helix of inheritance winding endlessly, carrying both past and potential. Each life adds a single twist to that infinite thread, shaping the pattern of the whole. In their secret texts, they describe time as a living organism, one that dreams of itself through repetition. From a theoretical perspective, this model of time changes everything. If the universe moves in spirals, then no event is ever isolated. Every moment echoes others before it, and every future is already written within the rhythm of the past. But this does not mean destiny is fixed. In a spiral, every turn alters its curvature. Change is constant, but direction is eternal. The Fremen illustrate this with sand. They pour it slowly from their hands into circles, letting the wind catch and scatter it. Each grain follows its own path, but together they form a moving spiral, chaotic up close, harmonious from above. They say this is how the universe looks to the eyes of the divine. Countless lives, countless choices, all flowing in pattern too vast to see. Paul Atreides once glimpsed this structure through spice and vision. His prescience was not prophecy, it was perception of rhythm. He saw the spiral turning and mistook it for destiny. He believed he could steer it, but the spiral has no center to command. It moves by balance, not will. Every action creates its opposite. Every awakening calls for rest. The lesson he could never escape, and that his descendants would one day learn, is that control is illusion. Harmony, not power, is the true language of time. Centuries after Paul's empire faded into memory, the children of the desert began to notice the spiral in everything. In the way the worms carved their paths through the sand, in the clouds above the oasis, curling into infinite loops, even in the pattern of their own footsteps as they walked, lines that curved naturally into arcs, never straight, never still. To them, this was not coincidence. It was communication. They came to believe that the universe speaks through repetition. Every echo, every dream, every reoccurrence is the cosmos reminding itself of its design. Their storytellers began to describe time as a living being, a serpent eating its tail, a worm circling through eternity, devouring its past to feed its future. They called it Shai Orud, the infinite maker. Unlike Shai Hulud, who ruled the desert, Shai Orud ruled time itself, the unseen rhythm that guides all worlds, all lives. But even this God, they said, is not separate from them. The spiral exists within every living thing. When a person breathes, when they sleep, when they are born and die, they trace the same pattern. Inhale, exhale, day, night, life, death, expansion, contraction. The body itself is a miniature universe spinning through the same infinite dance. From a scientific view, this concept mirrors the fractal nature of existence, the repetition of pattern across scale. Galaxies spiral like shells, shells spiral like storms, storms spiral like DNA. The geometry of life is the geometry of time. The universe remembers its shape in everything it creates. And so the children teach their young not to fear the end of things. To them, every ending is a curve turning inward, a preparation for renewal. They do not mourn death, they call it the returning. When a person passes, their body is wrapped in cloth, marked with spirals, and returned to the sand. The tribe gathers in silence, listening to the wind. If it circles, if it forms a small vortex over the grave, they say the person's spirit has joined the great rhythm once more. The Bene Gesserit eventually study this ritual with fascination. To them, it represents a philosophy lost to most of the galaxy, a worldview that sees no separation between physics and faith, between matter and meaning. The spiral, they realize, is not superstition. It is truth expressed through symbol. Awareness does not move forward, it deepens, and this depth, this constant folding inward, gives the universe its resilience. Empires rise and fall, civilizations bloom and fade, yet awareness continues, spiraling back upon itself, carrying memory as gravity carries planets. Nothing is wasted, nothing forgotten. Each revolution brings new understanding, even if it looks like return. The Fremen have a prayer for this understanding. They recite it when storms pass, when children are born, when the stars shift above the horizon. It goes, "May my life be a circle that turns without end. May my death be the silence between breaths. May the world remember me as I remember it." It is both farewell and promise, an acknowledgement that memory itself is immortality. On certain nights, when the wind moves in slow, spiraling gusts carrying the golden dust of spice across the horizon, the children of the desert say the planet is dreaming again. The worms turn in their sleep, the dunes shift in rhythm, and the air hums softly with the sound of cycles overlapping. The old scholars call this the resonance of time, the vibration left behind by countless generations moving in harmony. The Fremen simply call it peace, because they know the truth that Paul could never fully grasp, that time is not a line to be followed, but a song to be remembered, that destiny is not a command, but a rhythm waiting to be heard, and that the purpose of awareness is not to escape the spiral, but to dance within it, endlessly, gracefully, awake. When dawn breaks over the dunes, the light forms spirals in the sand, golden lines winding outward toward the horizon. The people stand in silence, watching, knowing that the same pattern appears in the sky, in the stars, in their own hearts. For this is the ultimate revelation of Arrakis, the planet that learned to think, to rest and to dream again, that the universe is not moving toward an end, it is returning forever to the beginning. And in that eternal return it finds what it was always seeking, not control, not salvation, but memory. The spiral continues, as gentle as breath, as endless as the desert wind. The Fremen have a saying, "The desert sees through all things." It is not a metaphor. To them, the sands themselves are eyes, countless, patient, eternal. They believe that every grain watches, that the wind records, that the planet remembers. And if the desert sees, then what does it see through? The answer, whispered only in prayer, is the eyes of the Maker. To outsiders, these words refer to the sandworms, the great makers of Arrakis. Their massive golden eyes, glowing with the reflected sunlight, are among the most haunting images of the desert. But to the Fremen, those eyes are not organs of sight, they are windows through which the universe perceives itself. The worms do not look at the world looks through them. When one stands before a worm, truly stands without fear, without intention, the gaze it casts is not judgment nor curiosity, it is recognition. To meet the eyes of the Maker is to remember that you are part of the same awareness that formed the stars, the sand, and the silence between. The children of the desert still tell stories of those eyes. They say that in ancient times, when the worms still ruled the dunes, a rider could see whole worlds reflected within them. Oceans, skies, forgotten planets drifting in the void. The light within the worm's gaze was not local, it was cosmic. It carried the memory of creation itself. From a theoretical standpoint, the eyes of the Maker represent one of Dune's deepest metaphors, that perception is not confined to individuals. The universe is aware of itself through every conscious being. Every creature, every atom, every storm is an organ of that awareness. The worms, vast and ancient, are simply the clearest mirrors of that truth. When the Fremen say that the desert sees, they mean that the planet observes itself through life. The sand feels footsteps not as disturbance, but as awareness meeting awareness. The worm hears vibration not as sound, but as recognition, the pulse of consciousness echoing back through matter. After the return of the dunes, when balance was restored between sand and garden, the children began to notice a new kind of light in the eyes of the worms. It was not brightness as such, but depth, a shimmering intelligence, softer, more peaceful than before. The worms no longer rose in fury, they rose in greeting. Some scholars of the Bene Gesserit came to study this phenomenon. They expected biology, change in pigment, shift in adaptation. What they found instead was mystery. The eyes of the new worms reflected not only sunlight, but the colour of the sky, the hue of distant stars. When observed closely, the surface shimmered with patterns, spirals, fractals, symbols resembling the geometric languages of thought. The Fremen elders smiled when they heard the reports. Of course, they said. The Maker sees more than the world. The Maker sees the memory of the universe. The Bene Gesserit called it reflexive luminescence, but the Fremen knew it as the look of return. It signified that the worms, the planet, and life itself had reached mutual awareness. The eyes of the Maker were not windows anymore. They were mirrors. From a philosophical perspective, this moment marks the full awakening of planetary consciousness. Arrakis has become self-aware, not through technology, not through evolution, but through understanding. Every movement, every breeze, every drop of water now participates in seeing. Awareness no longer belongs to individuals. It is shared, distributed across the entire ecosystem. This is why the children often say, "We are seen." It is not a statement of faith, but of fact. To live on Arrakis now is to live within the gaze of awareness itself. When they walk the dunes, they feel it, a soft pressure in the air, as if the world is gently attentive. It is not surveillance or control. It is recognition, like the warmth of the sunlight on skin. The worms, sleeping beneath the surface, are the lenses of this vast perception. Their eyes do not open, yet everything sees through them. At night, when the moons rise, the light reflects off the dunes in strange ways. Observers notice that from above, from the decks of orbiting ships, the patterns of dunes and rivers form a spiral shape centered around the largest worm territories. When light passes across them, it shimmers in pulses like the blinking of an eye. The planet itself seems to be watching the stars. The Bene Gesserit, always eager to categorize, call this phenomenon planetary photonic synchronization, the result of reflected moonlight, air currents, and sand composition. But the Fremen know better. They say the planet is remembering what it once saw, that the eyes of the Maker now look outward, seeing not only itself, but the universe beyond. This raises a deeper theory, one that unites science and spirit. If consciousness emerges wherever awareness observes itself, then perhaps every world, every sun, every galaxy has its own form of seeing. Each system is an eye in the body of creation, and the universe is the mind behind those eyes. In this vision, Arrakis is not a world apart, but one of many mirrors, a reflection in the infinite gaze of the cosmos. The desert, the worms, the people, all are part of the same awareness dreaming of itself through matter. The children teach this now as the central truth of their philosophy. When a child comes of age, they are taken to the open dunes and asked to stand alone beneath the sky. There they close their eyes and listen to the hum of the earth. Then they open them again to the horizon. If they see nothing but distance, the elders say they are not yet ready. But if they feel that the world is looking back, quietly, patiently, lovingly, then they have seen through the eyes of the Maker. The Bene Gesserit, though cautious to admit it, eventually come to accept this idea as well. They begin to speak of planetary empathy, a subtle connection between human thought and environmental awareness. What Arrakis proves is that consciousness, once awakened, does not vanish with death or sleep. It spreads through air, through soil, through memory. Every being, from worm to human, becomes both observer and observed. Every thought becomes a reflection in the infinite mirror. The desert, in learning to see itself, has become part of something much larger, the universe awakening through its own eyes. The Fremen now end their prayers with a single line, spoken softly like a secret carried on the wind. We are the eyes that see, and the eyes that are seen. It is their way of acknowledging that perception is a two-way mirror, that every act of awareness is both looking and being looked upon. To exist is to